আমরা কি শুরু করব? শুভদীপদা রয়েছো?
স্যার যদি পারমিট করেন তাহলে আমরা 5 মিনিট
হ্যাঁ।
যদি দেখে নিতে চাই। স্যার আমরা কি 5 মিনিট একটু অপেক্ষা করে তারপর শুরু করতে পারি?
হ্যাঁ শিওর।
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
ঠিক আছে। শুরু করি তাহলে।
হ্যাঁ শুরু কর।
ঠিক আছে। Good evening everyone. Good evening sir. On behalf of Society for Research Alternative, I welcome you all to this session. Today's lecture is titled Recognition versus Redistribution, the Great Poundra Divide in Colonial Bengal by Professor Mahitosh Mandal. It is a tribute by us to Babasaheb Ambedkar on his 131st birthday. The primary motto behind setting up this organization 2 years back was an attempt to give voice to the marginalized by staying at the margin. And our constant effort is to adhere to the visions of Baba Saheb. The Society for Research Alternative is an interdisciplinary research organization located at Shuri in the district of Bhim, West Bengal. The motto of our organization lies in the need for promoting interdisciplinary research and exploring tools for connecting communities embedded in a wider passion for upholding social justice and the empowerment of the marginalized. Today we have with us Dr. Mahitosh Mandal. Dr. Mahitosh Mandal is the chair at the Department of English, Presidency University, Kolkata. His research interests include caste and psychoanalysis. His research papers have been published in journals like Lacuna, International Journal for Lacanian Psychoanalysis, Caste, a global journal on social exclusion, and Interdisciplinary Literary Studies, a journal for criticism and theory. His first book, Jacques Lacan, From Clinic to Culture, was published by Orient Black Swan in 2018. Currently, his monograph on autoethnography of the Poundras, a Dalit community from West Bengal, is under contract with Navayana. His monograph on a psychoanalytic study of the British novelist John Fowles is under contract with Routledge, and his co-edited volume with the Holocaust on the Holocaust and popular culture is in the press and is soon to be published by Routledge. He has delivered about 40 invited talks and conference presentation at national and international levels. In 2021, he won the Navayana Dalit History Fellowship for his project on casteism in Bengal and the Global Engagement Fund of the University College London for his project on anti-casteism in higher education. A Dalit activist based in West Bengal who dreams of a casteless society, Dr. Mondal is also founder and chief editor of All About Ambedkar, a journal on theory and praxis. Welcome, sir, to our virtual platform.
Hi.
Are you there?
Yes. So thank you
Welcome,
very
sir.
much for the introduction, Shagata. And it's really an honor to be here and to be a part of the initiative that you have undertaken. And without much ado, I would like to begin initially by thanking, of course, Shubhadeep, who got in touch with me initially, and we had decided to eventually give this talk. And also to you, Shagata, for the introduction, for the kind introduction. So thank you very much. And I was really struck by the name of the association that you have created, which is Society for Research Alternatives, as opposed to Society for Alternative Research. So that was really interesting, and I congratulate you on actually creating this group, this association, which I'm sure is going to contribute to the development of various research projects for many in the coming years. Today is, of course, Ambedkar Jayanti and Bhim Jayanti, whatever way you put it. And the request that came to me from Shubhadeep in particular and from Society for Research Alternatives was to talk about Bengal in particular. And I found it interesting because at the end of the day, the anti-caste movement in Bengal has to be documented. It is something that has not been documented. It's definitely an area of what you call research alternative. And also, when we talk about Baba and when we celebrate his birthday, it's not only that we are celebrating his life and works and achievements, we're also celebrating Dalit history, also celebrating the contributions of many other Dalit activists, anti-caste activists over the years. And it is also a celebration in that sense of Dalit history. And in today's talk, I want to remember an important point in the history of one particular Dalit community in Bengal, which is the Poundra community. And that history is, of course, large, and it is not possible to talk about everything that happened. But I would like to talk about one specific episode, as it were, in that history. Yeah, okay, so you can't hear me properly? Okay. So now is it fine?
Yes, sir. Now it is fine. Actually, previously it was echoing, so that's why.
Okay. Sorry, this is the problem with the virtual platform. Things like this happen all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I really need to talk about is one particular episode from Dalit history of the Poundras. Poundras being one of the Dalit communities in Bengal. There are, as of 2001, there are about 60 Dalit communities in Bengal. And Poundras constitute the fourth largest population. The first is the Rajbangshi, and then Namoshudro, then Bagdi, and then the Poundras. And as of 2001 census, over 22 lakh people belong to the Poundra community. And they have a long history of anti-caste struggle, they have a long history of fighting Brahminical supremacy and so on and so forth. And I will select just one episode from this history of the Poundras, or from the Dalit history of Bengal, and try and annotate that episode in today's lecture, which is called Recognition versus Redistribution, the Great Poundra Divide in Colonial Bengal. Excuse me, I'm putting it like this for convenience. It might look bad, but it's funny. Never mind. Yeah. So of course, so the occasion of Ambedkar Jayanti, in my understanding, is really, really important in the sense that it provides an opportunity, so to say, to revisit the history of anti-caste struggle and anti-caste movement, not just in the context of Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, but I think across the country. Okay, so I'll take this opportunity to actually elaborate on that. Just a quick, annotation of the title, The Great Poundra Divide. It's a divide that was centered on the division between people who fought for recognition and the people who fought for redistribution. I'll explain these terms shortly, but just to annotate the title right away, not to confuse anything. And this I consider to be the Great Poundra Divide. I consider it to be a very important moment in the history of the Poundras. Historians don't talk about these things, like historians who are talking about Bengal's history, talking about Indian history, Indian anti-colonial movement, anti-British movement, Bengal Renaissance. They don't talk about these important moments in Dalit history. So today, I'm deliberately called it the Great Poundra Divide, because in my understanding, it's a great moment in the Poundra history. I'll try and talk about that very shortly. So the first thing that one needs to understand when we think about Dalit politics in general, or anti-caste politics in general, is that this politics, as it were, can be understood at two levels, at two intersectional axes. One is the question of redistribution. The other is the question of recognition. Now, these two terms, those of you who are already familiar with these terms, you would know that these two terms I'm not using, not using for the first time. These have been theorized at length by many, including in particular by the American philosopher, theorist, feminist, Nancy Fraser. Nancy Fraser wrote at length about the politics of recognition and politics of redistribution. And let me annotate these two terms right away. For Nancy Fraser, the movement for social justice in contemporary times, in the last 100 years or so, this movement for social justice, these claims of social justice, Nancy Fraser says, there have been a shift. She finds a shift from what she calls claims for redistribution to claims for recognition. There is a shift she recognizes in the history of the fight, the battle for social justice, and that shift, that movement, this transition, as she calls it, is from redistribution to recognition. What is redistribution? Very simply put, redistribution is redistribution of wealth and resources. The have-nots, the proletariat in Marxist terms, those who are at class level, who are at the lowest class, they have to be provided with wealth and resources. So it is fundamentally, some people are owning the wealth, resources. The task is to redistribute the wealth so as to bring about equality, so as to end economic injustice. So redistribution is a paradigm, is an answer to what Nancy Fraser calls maldistribution. So society, for her, social injustice for her is of two kinds: injustice due to maldistribution and injustice due to misrecognition. Okay, so I think one of the reasons why it becomes important to think about this idea is that maldistribution has been the source of a lot of injustice, and maldistribution or therefore redistribution has been the focus of Marxist or communist approach to social injustice. So communists believe that it is important to redistribute wealth, and the have-nots should also have equal right to resources and so on and so forth. So one could say the politics of redistribution or the measure of redistribution to address maldistribution is fundamentally a communist, class-based politics. Okay. The other form, which is the injustice related to misrecognition, is fundamentally related to misrecognizing a human being, or in other words, not recognizing a human being to be a human being. In other words, misrecognition is an injustice that involves dehumanization. So you do not consider certain human beings to be human beings. You dehumanize them. You consider them even less than animals. You consider them to be outcasts. You consider them to be people who can be exploited just because they are black, they are women, they are lower caste, they are Dalits. They are part of an alternative sexuality, and so on and so forth. So therefore, misrecognition becomes another form of injustice where it involves dehumanizing the individual. And this is also the source of the entire set of movements called human rights movements and the laws which prevent human rights violations. Therefore, two kinds of injustice for Nancy Fraser becomes important. One, I repeat, is the injustice related to maldistribution and the injustice related to misrecognition. Okay. Now, the point I'm trying to make is this. For Nancy Fraser, there has been a transition in the last few years from a politics of redistribution to a politics of recognition. What does she mean by that? She means that we are living in a post-communist era where the human identity or the identity politics becomes more important than class politics. Therefore, there is a transition from class politics to identity politics, from a politics of redistribution to politics of recognition. And she actually refers to some features of this. For example, she says that redistribution involves redistribution is basically based on at the economic level, and it involves exploitation, it involves economic marginalization, and it involves deprivation. Exploitation, economic marginalization, and deprivation. This is the very source of maldistributive justice. Whereas the question of recognition or misrecognition involves cultural domination, non-recognition, and disrespect. So, Brahmins culturally dominating on the Dalits, non-recognition, Dalits not being recognized as human beings, and disrespect. All the time, Dalits are being disrespected. They are being dishonored and humiliated, insulted, and so on and so forth. So therefore, what Nancy Fraser says is that there has been a shift from politics of redistribution to recognition. However, she mentions one point, that these two kinds of politics are different. They can be interrelated, and they inform each other. And she makes this point that in certain cases, and she calls these cases describes these groups as two-dimensionally subordinated groups that are doubly subordinated or subordinated at 2 dimensions. These groups, she describes them as the racial group based on gender. So, gender groups, race groups, these groups of people are described by Nancy Fraser as 2-dimensionally subordinated groups. What happens to these 2-dimensionally subordinated groups? These 2-dimensionally subordinated groups, they suffer from both maldistribution and misrecognition. So if you just take away, if you just try to address maldistribution, their suffering will not come to an end. And if you just address the question of misrecognition, their suffering will not come to an end. And this is one of the criticisms against even Marxism that was provided by Babasaheb. Babasaheb said that Marxism is very much interested in creating classless society, not considering the idea that in order to create a classless society, Dalits have to be first and foremost considered as humans. So first you have to create a casteless society, then you can go for a classless society. The point therefore what he, although he didn't read Nancy Fraser, it was impossible historically, but if you read Ambedkar in conjunction with Nancy Fraser, you would realize that the idea that Babasaheb seems to be implying is that one needs to not only think about redistribution, of wealth and resources among the Dalits in order to empower them. But one also needs to bring them recognition as human beings, as equal human beings, not Harijan. Like Gandhi said, Dalits are Harijans. Harijan, Baba Sahib said, Harijan, considering Dalits as equal in the eyes of God. Baba Sahib said, no use being equal in the eyes of God. We want to be equal in the eyes of human beings. Being equal in the eyes of human beings is the very politics of recognition. And Dalits have been non-recognized, Dalits have been misrecognized, Dalits have been dehumanized. It is only a politics of recognition that can bring back their dignity. But the point, if you take Nancy Fraser's theory seriously, the point is that for marginalized groups like, let's say, although Nancy Fraser doesn't talk about caste, doesn't talk about the Dalits, but if you think about those groups of people who are two-dimensionally subordinated, these groups of people suffer from two kinds of injustice. I repeat, injustice related to maldistribution and injustice related to misrecognition. And in order for their emancipation to take place, in order for their empowerment to take place, both these injustices have to be addressed simultaneously. You just can't engage in a Marxist movement to create a casteless society, or nor can you just engage in a movement which is only for the rights and only for the recognition of the Dalits as human beings. You create statues and you have people representing the community and so on and so forth. In order for both the upper and the lower class within the Dalit community to experience so to say, emancipation, empowerment, both distribution and recognition have to be used as the paradigms for social justice. I hope it is clear up to now. Am I making sense? Just to ask, double check. Am I making sense? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Good. So the point I'm trying to make is this. So my claim in today's talk is that Dalit politics has to be, and although this claim has already been made by Radha Sharkar in particular, in an article published in EPW where she borrowed these terms from Nancy Fraser, my claim is that Dalit politics has to consider both the paradigm of redistribution and the paradigm of recognition in order to address the question of the dehumanization of the Dalits and the economic suffering, exploitation of the Dalits. Because as you know, Dalits are the poorest of the poor. Like the bulk of the poor in the entire country, they are Dalits. They belong to the scheduled castes. So the claim I'm trying to make is that the Dalit politics in general has to involve with both the politics of recognition and the politics of redistribution. And this is a point that has been made long back. I mean, if you look into the history of Dalit politics, across the country, various Dalit groups, you might find traces of this. But this has been remarkably demonstrated. This idea that redistribution and recognition have to be addressed simultaneously, have to be achieved simultaneously. This idea has been remarkably addressed by the Poundras of Bengal. Sometime in the 1930s, and I'll explain those points. So Poundras, as I said, they constitute the fourth largest population of Dalits in West Bengal as of 2001. And they historically in colonial times, because of the colonial intervention, as you know, the Dalits started asserting themselves. It is thanks to colonial modernity, as Karl Marx said, that the British will bring about a transition to Indian history from feudal society to modern Indian society. And the British will function as the unconscious tool of India's historical transformation. And Marx expected that one day when there would be casteless society, caste would be destroyed because of the invasion, as it were, of technology, of industry, of capitalism. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because Marxist approach is basically an approach of redistribution. Redistribution, I claim, alone cannot address the question of the dehumanization, the suffering, the injustice suffered by the Dalits. So the point I'm trying to make is the Poundras, like many other Dalit castes, Dalit communities in Bengal, like the Namashudras, Rajbongshis in particular, in the late 19th and early 20th century, Poundras also, thanks to the British treating all Indians as natives and not as Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras, untouchables, but as natives. So even the untouchables, they got an opportunity to also get involved in certain, in many affairs of the state, many affairs of public administration, and they were also employed in many kinds of activities by the government and so on and so forth. So Dalits started asserting themselves in various ways. And the Namashudras in Bengal, they started, like they were Chandals, they belonged to the Chandal caste. Of course, they refused to be called Chandals for obvious reasons. So they adopted the term Namashudra. Now, this is a problematic term because why would you call yourself Namashudra? I mean, Shudra is, once again, to call yourself Shudra is to include yourself within the Varna system. So although you're trying to resist resist Brahminical oppression and Brahminical condemnation, you are at the same time reproducing the Varna structure. Okay, so even the Namashudras of today, some of them also criticize the term, the word Shudra in Namashudra. Poundras also tried to assert themselves as Poundra Kshatriya. They said we are Kshatriyas. So it's an ambiguous term in the sense that if you are trying to actually claim that you are resisting the Brahminical supremacy, then you shouldn't be calling yourself Kshatriyas. You should be calling yourself something else, but not Kshatriyas, because you're reproducing the Varna structure. I'll talk about these things. It happened not only in Bengal, it also happened in Tamil Nadu. The other day I was part of a session with two Tamil scholars on this question of assertion of caste identity and identity politics, and they also said the same things, that Periyar opposed this idea, of course, that you shouldn't be using the vocabulary, the linguistic cultural vocabulary of the Brahmins, because if you do that, you won't be able to annihilate caste. But that's a different issue. I don't have time for this. I have very little time, so I'll just jump straight the discussion, which is that if you think about the Poundras in the 1930s, Poundras were divided or were spread across various districts in the undivided Bengal. You had Poundras in South 24 Parganas. You had Poundras in Kolkata. You had Poundras in Howrah district. You had Poundras in Midnapur. You had Poundras in Khulna and Jashore districts, which is now in Bangladesh. Now, therefore, Poundras were spread across the state or across this province, the Bengal province, so to say. And the Poundras who actually dominated the identity movement were the Poundras from South 24 Parganas and from Kolkata region. But there were also Poundras from Bangladesh, like from the present Bangladesh, and they had different take on the issue of the injustice suffered by the Poundras. And I will talk about that very quickly. I'll say that it is possible to divide the response of the Poundras to the social injustice suffered by them. It is possible to divide their response into two clear categories. One, Poundras who asserted the politics of recognition, Poundras who went for the politics of recognition, and the Poundras who started asserting, claiming the politics of redistribution. So, Poundras particularly based in the South 24 Parganas and Midnapur region, including Raicharan Sardar, Beni Madhav Haldar. People don't talk about these names. I'm deliberately trying to emphasize their names. We need to include them in the history, so-called history that has been written. So Raicharan Sardar, Beni Madhav Haldar, Srimanto Noskar, and others. They were from South 24 Parganas regions. You had Mahendranath Karan, another major Poundra thinker from Midnapur. These are the people. So Raicharan Sardar was the founder of many organizations. He is considered to be the major figure in the Poundra movement in the early 20th century. And these people, they were fighting for self-respect. Of course, everybody was fighting for self-respect, but they were more focused on recognition. So they said that we are being maltreated as untouchables. We are being included within the depressed class, but we don't want to accept that. Because why? Because we are not untouchables. We have historically been Kshatriyas and so on and so forth. So we must reclaim our Kshatriyahood. So this is one paradigm where they tried to rename themselves from. They were called Pod, P-O-D, which was a distortion of the original word Poundra. Some of them claim, but it also was a derogatory word because in Bangla it is slang, which means rectum or anus and so on and so forth. So the word Pod was deliberately used to condemn this community. And Poundras, therefore, refused to be called both. So they wanted a new name for themselves. Like the Chondas, they wanted a new name for themselves. The Poundras also wanted a new name for themselves, and they worked on a few options. Okay, so first they called themselves Poundra Kshatriyas. The government refused to call them Kshatriyas because it would be confusing, because they are not actually Kshatriyas, so to say, but they claimed that they were Kshatriyas. At one point, they claimed themselves to be Bhrat Kshatriyas, Kshatriyas who were initially Kshatriyas, but they were refused Brahminical sacred thread and so on and so forth. So they were fallen. They were fallen from the Kshatriya status. So they are Bhrat Kshatriyas. So Poundra Kshatriya, Kshatriya, Bhrat Kshatriya, and so on and so forth. So different names they worked on. Ultimately, the word Poundra was officially documented, as their name, and the word Poth could somehow be rejected. Still, like people like us who belong to the Poundra community, we have at several times we have been made fun of for belonging to the caste Poth. They ultimately saying, like, I know somebody who was talking to me the other day. He said, like, somebody called him, "Oh, tu to poder chela, you are the son of a Poth," which is basically a condemnable word, and basically expressing contempt through distorting the word, the sound of the word, and so on and so forth. So this was, even at the terminological level, even at the linguistic level, this was a major humiliation, major injustice. And this linguistic, as it were, dehumanization was connected to the way the Brahminical administration, the Brahmins in general, the upper caste, the higher castes within, quote unquote, higher castes within Bengal, the way they treated the Poundras. Poundras were maltreated all the time. At one point, even, they were called Jal Abavaharjo, meaning Brahmins wouldn't be taking water from them. But more than that, other Poundras report that they were not even allowed to enter temples. Particularly in the Khulna and Joshua districts, Poundras like Rajendranath Sarkar, he has written in Jibon Kotha, his autobiography, the second autobiography from among the Poundras, he has written how he was repeatedly criticized. And even he was abused and humiliated, insulted, because he dared to enter the temple of the goddess Durga. And this is written in detail. So even though some Poundras claim that they were not really untouchables, some other claims they were totally treated as untouchables. So the point I'm trying to make is this maltreatment of Poundras as untouchables, this is fundamentally what Nancy Fraser calls misrecognition. Injustice related to misrecognition. Injustice related to non-recognition of these human beings as human beings. Injustice related to not giving them the dignity that they deserve. And this injustice had to be addressed. And the Poundras, particularly Rajendranath Sardar, Beni Madhav Halda, Srimantu Noshkar, Mohendranath Karan, in particular, these people, they wanted to tell the government, the British government, British Raj, that look, we are not untouchables, we are as such, but historically we are not, and our original status as Kshatriyas must be reinstalled. And this is why something very interesting happened in 1919, which in my understanding is a major moment in Dalit history in Bengal. In 1919, Mohendranath Karan, who is a historian, who is considered to be a major historian among the Poundras, he wrote a book called A History and Ethnology of Cultivating Poths. And he wrote this book, you'd be surprised to know, in English. Perhaps the first ever book written by a Dalit in English from Bengal is this book, The History and Ethnology of the Cultivating Poths. And in this book, what Mohendranath Karan tries to establish is basically to show that Poundras of Bengal, they are not fishing Poths or fishing Poundras. He says that there are two kinds of Poundras. Poundras who are like cultivating Poundras, who basically belong to, like, who are farmers, who have historically been farmers, and Poundras who have been fishermen or people fishing, and so on and so forth. So according to him, the fishing Poundras or fishing Poths, they are the non-Aryan. Very funny, should I say, but still very interesting. Non-Aryan Poths, and therefore they are the, they are the Mlessos, the untouchables, and so on and so forth. But the cultivating Poths, they are not. They are one could say. They are Aryans, and therefore they have a status in the Hindu scriptures, and they are treated as such, and so on and so forth. Just give me a second.
Please unmute yourself.
Sir, you have to unmute.
Okay, yeah. All right. So am I making sense? Do you understand?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Good. So very quickly what I'm trying to say is this, that for Mahendranath Karan, and this is a major work of the Dalits from Colonial Bengal, 1919, and this book was written because Rai Charan Sardar wanted him to write this book. So it is, you could say, the manifesto of the Poundras fighting for politics of recognition in the early 20th century. And he made a lot of claims. For example, in this book, he said that Poundras must not be called Mlessos. They are not Mlessos. They are not outside Hindu caste system. They are not outcasts. He also claimed that Poundras were the cultivating poets. They were basically Kshatriyas because they are descendants of King Poundra, who was apparently the step brother, I should say, of Sri Krishna. And Sri Krishna is also known as Pundarikaksha. And so Mahendranath Karan studies a lot of the scriptures from the Hindu scriptures, and he tries to establish that at the end of the day, Poundras have a Kshatriya-hood, have a Kshatriya history, and they're actually Kshatriyas. And he also claims that Poundras must not be called, derogatorily as Chasha. As you know, Chasha is a derogatory term. Farmers are condemned as Chasha Chele, Chashar Me, Chashar Bari, and so on and so forth. And he said that Chasha must not be used as a derogatory term because historically, for various reasons, Poundras had to take recourse to agriculture because they were refused their Kshatriya status eventually. He also gives a reason why the Poundras have lost their Kshatriya status. He says that for various reasons, particularly King Poundra, he engaged in certain conflicts with the Brahmins, and the Brahmins refused to give them the sacred thread, and so on and so forth. This is an explanation that goes very well with Babasaheb Ambedkar's book, Who Were the Shudras, where Babasaheb said that originally there were 3 Varnas, not 4 Varnas, and it is some section of the Kshatriyas who were refused the sacred thread, and that is how they came to be known as the 4th Varna. But Shudras were basically Kshatriyas. Almost at a similar level, Mahendranath Karan argues that the Poundras were actually Kshatriyas, and the Brahmins refused them the sacred thread. So they eventually, and even he talks about the wrath of Parashuram. And Parashuram was angry with the Kshatriyas. So Kshatriyas escaped from various parts of the country, and some of them took shelter in the part which is known as Bengal. And therefore, the Poundras, they had to hide themselves, and they couldn't reveal that they were Kshatriyas because they would have been killed otherwise. So they took different professions, including agriculture, and they also, at one level, the Poundras were also engaged in they also converted to Buddhism. Another point that he mentions, that Poundras were discriminated all the more because they lost their Kshatriya status. Not only that, they also converted to Buddhism. So converting to Buddhism also affected their, being embraced by the Brahmins. The Brahmins got all the more angry with the Poundras. So he gives a long history and tries to show, it's a very detailed analytical work, history and ethnology of the Poundras, of the cultivating poets, where he basically shows that Poundras must not be considered as untouchables because historically they are not. They must be considered as Kshatriyas. They must be, their history of Kshatriyahood must be revived, so to say. And all the movement that was kind of launched by Raicharan Sardar, Beni Madhav Halder, Srimanto Noskar, Mahendranath Karan, all of them engaged in this self-respect movement, which basically involved renaming themselves, basically involved referring to the glorious past, basically involved reviving their Kshatriyahood, and thereby claiming that they must be recognized as Kshatriyas. They must be recognized as a part of the Varna system. They must be recognized as Savarnas. And they must not be confused with the Mlithsos, the untouchables, and so on. So this is a very problematic stance if you think about it. Because you are not trying to annihilate Varna system or caste system, but you are trying to include yourself within it and thereby trying to elevate your status. However, this is just one section of the Poundras that talked about such an argument about recognition. The other section, of course, I should say that I shouldn't be saying that Mahendranath Karan is doing it deliberately. You should try and understand. I have a very empathetic outlook, approach to this, desire to be considered as Kshatriyas. I think they suffered so much humiliation and insult, psychological damage. This was their coping mechanism. Whenever we suffer from certain trauma, certain insults, certain humiliation, we come up with some coping mechanism. For the Poundras, like Mahendranath Karan writes, the coping mechanism was to, immediately refer to the history, and try to claim, no, historically we have been better, we have been of higher rung, and so on and so forth. So I think this has to be understood in a more empathetic way, rather than saying that they are just being confined within the Brahminical, because they suffered it, and they are trying to, at one level, they're trying to critique Brahminical intervention in their life, or Brahminical intervention that dehumanized their status. Now let me move to the second paradigm of politics launched by the Dalits. By the Poundras. And this paradigm could be considered as politics of redistribution, as particularly promoted by the Poundras from Jashore and from Khulna. And the major figure, among these, at least two people can be mentioned: Rajendranath Sarkar and and Shuniti Sarkar. But Rajendranath Sarkar is the major kind of leader, one could say, from the Khulna and Jashore district, and he has written in detail about the episode that I'm trying to theorize today. And I will very quickly read out two sections from the autobiography of Rajendranath Sarkar. But before that, I have two slides for that. But before that, let me give you a background. Unlike the Poundras of South 24 Parganas and Kolkata and Medinipur, the Poundras of Khulna and Jashore, these Poundras, they thought it doesn't matter whether we have had a glorious past. It doesn't matter whether we have been Kshatriyas or not. What matters is the reality, not the history, not the past, but the present condition of the Poundras. And what is that condition? The condition is that we're treated as untouchables. We may not be untouchables theoretically, historically, but we're treated as such. We're treated as untouchables. We're treated as not human beings, not human enough. We are dehumanized at multiple levels. And Rajendranath Sarkar, who came from a very poor family of farmers, he suffered a series of discrimination in his life, which he has grouped as Jatir Name Bojjati. Discrimination in the name of caste purity, if I can translate it roughly. And in his autobiography, Jibon Kotha, he has enlisted several such instances from his childhood to his becoming a lawyer. He became a lawyer, and he shows that how his school teacher maltreated him because he was a Poundra. He said that you are a Poundra, you would just remain a farmer. You would never be able to become anybody in life. Within the Khulna district, during Durga festival, as I said, discrimination. He was insulted for and humiliated for entering the Durga temple. When he was a student in a college in Kolkata, the principal insulted him and humiliated him and maltreated him because he was a Poundra. He also says that when he became a lawyer, the kind of discrimination that happened within the lawyer circuit, where the Dalits and the Poundra lawyers, particularly like someone like him, they couldn't use the same glass to drink water. Even they couldn't sit in the chair. They had to sit on the floor, and so on and so. You could experience all these kind of dehumanizing misrecognition, injustice based on misrecognition, that was suffered by Rajendranath Sarkar. So Rajendranath Sarkar, who didn't hail from that's the point I'm trying to make. That, like Nancy Fraser says, the redistribution concerns people who are the poorest of the poor. And similarly, in Mahitosh Mandal and Rajendranath Sarkar, they are somewhat, they were somewhat, somewhat wealthier, definitely, or not as poor, one could say, as Rajendranath Sarkar. Therefore, Rajendranath Sarkar has a different perspective. He not only is interested in asserting the human personality, the reclaiming the human dignity of the Poundras, he's also interested, he's also motivated, dedicated to the cause of redistribution of wealth. And what does he say? He says that it is not at all a matter of concern for me whether we have been Kshatriyas in the past. If we claim that we are Kshatriyas now, we are not going to get any benefit out of it. We are now the poorest of the poor. We are being dehumanized every day. Therefore, what we want is wealth. What we want is resources. What we want is redistribution of wealth and resources. And this conflict happened around 1933, when the British Raj announced a list of educationally, socially, and economically backward castes, eventually to be called scheduled castes. And they created a list, a potential list of scheduled castes, and in that list, Poundras were included. It happened in 1933. And they sent the list to the individual groups, like sent the list to the Poundras, to the Rajbangshis, to the Namashudras, and so on and so forth. And they wanted their opinion about the list. And this list was sent, as far as the Poundras was concerned, to Rai Charan Sardar, who was the vice president of Poundra Kshatriya Samiti. And he received the list, and he immediately he was furious. He said, no, we must not be included in the list of depressed class people, because it will be demeaning for us. We are not depressed class. We are not Dalits. We are not untouchables. So we must not be included in this. So he was vehemently opposed. He said, we are fighting for recognition, self-respect. If we say that we are Dalits, if the government categorizes us as Dalits, then our human dignity will be degraded. We are accepting that we are Dalits. We are not untouchables. We have not been untouchables. And Rajendranath Sarkar was totally opposed to this. He said, no. I am not interested in the history, in the glorious past, if there had been a glorious past. I'm interested in the present. And in the present, what I see is that Dalits, Poundras are suffering. They are suffering from the injustice, if I can use the phrase from Nancy Fraser. They're suffering the injustice of maldistribution. We must ask for redistribution. We must take the government provisions for the Dalits. And this is where, so in 1933, the government announces this. In late 1933, in South Suburban School, Kolkata, the Poundra Kshatriya Samiti, the members, they meet, and the members from Khulna and Jashad districts were not invited. The representatives from Khulna and Jashad district were not invited. And in the late 1933 meeting that happened in South Suburban School in Kolkata, the Poundras, particularly led by Rai Charan Sardar, the representatives who were present in that meeting, they unanimously decided that we must ask the government to exclude our name from the list of scheduled castes. However, the Khulna district and Jashad district representatives of the Poundras, they were opposed to this. They were vehemently for being included in the list. On 20th April 1935, another convention of the Poundra Kshatriyas were held in a school in Baliganj, which is still there, Jagabandhu Institution. On 20th April 1935, another convention happened, as I said, and in that conventions, even in this convention, Khulna district representatives were not invited. Poundras from Khulna, they were not invited. Because the people from South 25 Parganas, Kolkata and Midnapur, they knew that Khulna representatives will not agree with their resolution. However, this offended, of course, offended the people in Khulna, and to redress their grievances, a third meeting was convened, because as of people from Kolkata, South Parganas and Midnapur, the Khulna district representative, they were repeatedly asking for being included in the list of scheduled castes. On 12th May 1935, next month, so 12th April 1935, a convention happened, and then on 12th May 1935, another meeting happened in the house of Bhavasindhu Laskar in Taliganj, and there Khulna district representatives were invited. Which means Rajendranath Sarkar, Suniti Sarkar, and I think another person, three of them from Khulna and Joshua, they came to take part in the meeting. And in that meeting, something hilarious happened, in the sense that the Khulna district representatives were absolutely uncompromising. They said, I understand you are fighting for self-preservation, we are also fighting for recognition, but we want the reservation. We want government provisions for the uplift of the Dalits. So there was a huge conflict, and this is what I call the Great Poundra Divide. There was a huge conflict that took place on 12th May 1935 in a house of a Poundra in Taliganj, and in that there was a huge conflict. I'll just read out a few lines from that, from what happened, as documented by Rajendranath Sarkar. And the entire Poundra Kshatriya group was about to be split into two groups. It was about to be dismantled. A serious problem for the entire Poundra Kshatriya unity. Therefore, what happened was that after that conflict broke, the Khulna district representatives were requested, please, compromise with us, otherwise our entire community will be ripped apart, broken, and so on and so forth. So the three of them, they asked for a few minutes, they went outside, and they discussed something, and then they came up with the idea that, okay, we agree with you. So they agreed with the Poundras being excluded from the list of scheduled castes. And so the Poundra Kshatriya Samiti, particularly Rai Charan Sardar being the vice president, they drafted a letter and they sent it to the government. Now, another twist happened. It didn't end there. After Rajendranath Sarkar, Suniti Sarkar, and others, they left Kolkata. They went back to Khulna. When they were back to Khulna, they wrote another letter. In that letter, they adhered to their earliest position, and they said, we, as the representatives of many Poundras in the Khulna and Joshua districts, we ask the government to keep our name of the community, name of Poundra, within the list of scheduled castes. So even though they had to make a compromise on 12th May 1935, next week or after a few days, they came up with, they came back to their original position for redistribution, for reservation, for redressal of the injustice of maldistribution. And this is a very interesting kind of divide, as you understand. So this is the Poundra divide. So Rajendranath Sarkar and others from Khulna Joshua districts, they were supporting the cause of the poor Dalits. They're supporting the claims of redistribution, because they thought it was not enough to say that we want cultural recognition. It was not enough to say that we want to be known as Poundra Kshatriyas or Kshatriyas. It's not enough to help us out in the current situation. Let me quickly read out just two such. I'll just take like 10 more minutes maximum. Let me just read out one. I have it in front of me. It's in Bangla, but I'm sure you know. If you don't, I will just translate it for you. So this is the first paragraph I want to read out to you. This is from Jibon Kotha by Rajendranath Sarkar. And he's talking about this meeting that happened on 12th May 1935. Shabhar Pradhan Aloch, and I'm reading it out because it is an occasion to read out Dalit history. Okay? So as I read out, you also read it with me. because we are celebrating Dalit history, as I said, it's important to read out Dalit texts. সভার প্রধান আলোচ্য বিষয়, the সভা of 12th May 1935, সভার প্রধান আলোচ্য বিষয় সরকার কর্তৃক তপশিল জাতির তালিকায় এই জাতির নামভুক্ত হওয়া সমীচীন কিনা। শ্রদ্ধেয় রায়চরণ বাবু সরকারের প্রস্তাবিত ও প্রচারিত তপশিল জাতির তালিকায় এই জাতির নাম সন্নিবিষ্ট থাকা এই জাতির ক্ষত্রিয়ত্বের দাবির অসঙ্গতি ব্যঞ্জক ও মর্যাদা হানিকর এই যুক্তিতে তাহার বক্তব্য রাখেন এবং বিশদভাবে আলোচনা করেন এবং তালিকা হইতে এই জাতির নাম বাদ দিবার জন্য প্রস্তাব উত্থাপন করেন। So basically Raicharan Babu said that if you are claiming reservation, then you cannot claim Kshatriyahood at the same time. You either can say that you are Kshatriya, therefore you won't be categorized within the scheduled castes, or you can claim that you are a scheduled caste, so you have to give up your Kshatriya claim. So Raicharan Sardar said, we want to be known as Kshatriyas, therefore we must give up our claims on reservation and so on and so forth. Sri Hemchandra Noshkar মহাশয় বিশেষ জোরালো ভাবে রায়চরণ বাবুকে সমর্থন করেন। আমরা খুলনার 3 জন প্রতিনিধি ব্যতীত উপস্থিত অন্যান্য প্রায় সকলেই নাম বাদ দিবার পক্ষে প্রস্তাব সমর্থন করেন। আমরা খুলনার 3 জন প্রতিনিধি সমবেতভাবে এবং প্রত্যেকে প্রস্তাবের বিরোধিতা করি। সরকার কর্তৃক তপশিল জাতির অনুকূলে সর্বক্ষেত্রে সুযোগ ও সুবিধার ব্যবস্থা হওয়ায় এই জাতির সর্ব বিষয়ে উন্নতির পথ সুগম হইবে, এই কারণে আমরা ওই প্রস্তাবের বিরোধিতা করি। So why did they oppose being excluded from the list? They opposed Raicharan Sardar because they said that if we take the provisions of the government, সরকার কর্তৃক তপশিল জাতির অনুকূলে সর্বক্ষেত্রে সুযোগ ও সুবিধার ব্যবস্থা হওয়ায় এই জাতির সর্ব বিষয়ে উন্নতির পথ সুগম হইবে। So our advancement will be facilitated if we go for government provisions. সমর্থনকারীগণ তাহাদিগের সমর্থনের পোষকতায় অনেক যুক্তিতর্কের অবতারণা করেন। প্রায় 5 ঘন্টা ব্যাপী, this is what I'm saying, the great moment in Dalit history of the Poundras, the great Poundra divide, so to say. প্রায় 5 ঘন্টা, for 5 hours these debates continue. প্রায় 5 ঘন্টা ব্যাপী বেশ উত্তেজনাপূর্ণ তর্ক বিতর্ক ও বাক বিতণ্ডা হয়। উক্ত বক্তাগণ বক্তব্যের শেষে কেহ আমাদিগের মত পরিবর্তনের জন্য অনুরোধ করিতে ভোলেন নাই। So they were opposing them, they were saying that they want to be included and they were asked to change their opinion. যে এই বাক বিতণ্ডায় শ্রী ভবসিন্ধু লস্কর এটসেট্রা ও শ্রী অনুকূল চন্দ্র দাস মহাশয়, they were silent and so on. আমরা খুলনায় প্রতিনিধিগণ কোনো ক্রমেই আমাদের মত পরিবর্তন করিতে সম্মত হই নাই। And then something happened. অকস্মাৎ শ্রী হেমচন্দ্র নস্কর মহাশয় একটি দৃশ্যের সৃষ্টি করিলেন, এটা সিন ক্রিয়েট করা যাকে বলে, একটি দৃশ্যের সৃষ্টি করিলেন। তিনি তাহার স্কন্ধের স্খলিত চাদরখানি পুনরায় যথাস্থানে জড়াইয়া লইয়া আসন ত্যাগ করিয়া দাঁড়াইয়া বলিয়া উঠিলেন, তোমরা সব হাড়ি ডোম মুচি মেথারের সাথে একত্রে থাকতে চাও, থাকো, আমি চললাম। বেলেঘাটার নস্কররা স্বজাতির জন্য অনেক কিছু করেছে, একটা ছাত্রাবাস করবার ইচ্ছা ছিল, তার হবে না, আমি এই সভায় থাকবো না। Just look at the underlined sentence. I was reading it, I underlined. I have this cruel relation with books. I just draw this line with pen and so on and so forth. তোমরা সব হাড়ি ডোম মুচি মেথরের সাথে একত্রে থাকতে চাও। So Hemchandra Noskar claims if Poundras are included in the list of scheduled castes, then the Poundras would be considered similar to Dom, to Methor and other untouchables and lower castes and Mlessos. Look at how dominical even that approach. That's the problem with the question of recognition that was asserted. That as Periyar, if you follow Periyar's entire anti-caste agenda was that nobody above, nobody below. That's the idea. The casteless society can be created when everybody understands nobody is above me, nobody is below me. But here what Hemchandra Noskar is claiming, he is trying to reproduce the hierarchy and saying the Kshatriyas are at a higher level compared to the Dom and the Method and other castes. Okay. তিনি পুনরায় আসন গ্রহণ করিয়াছিলেন। হেমবাবু অকস্মাৎ রুদ্রমূর্তি ধারণ করায় উপস্থিত প্রতিনিধিগণ সকলে স্তম্ভিত হইয়াছিলেন। আমরা খুলনার প্রতিনিধিগণ ক্ষণকালের জন্য বিমূঢ় হইয়া পড়িলাম। So this happened, and as I said, after the Khulna representatives, they decided that, okay, fine, I'm not, we agree to your demand, etc. But they eventually did not agree, did not continue. The second justification that is provided by Rajendranath Sarkar, why the Khulna representatives, why did they support redistribution and not just recognition? Why did they support reservation? Why did they support Poundras being included in the list of scheduled castes? Is this? আমার যুক্তি ছিল, রাজেন্দ্রনাথ সরকার এসে আমার যুক্তি এই ছিল যে তৎকালীন দেশের ও সমাজের অবস্থার পরিপ্রেক্ষিতে এবং পৌন্ড্র ক্ষত্রিয় সমাজের অবনত ও অনগ্রসর অবস্থার কথা বিবেচনা করিয়া আমরা ক্ষত্রিয় এই যাত্রাভিমান লইয়া বর্তমানের প্রবল প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বিতার দিনে এই জাতিকে সরকার কর্তৃক প্রদত্ত সমস্ত সুযোগ সুবিধা হইতে বঞ্চিত করিয়া রাখিলে আমরা চিরকালই পশ্চাতে পড়িয়া থাকিব। এই সুযোগ ত্যাগ করা আমাদের কখনো কর্তব্য নহে এবং করিলে আমরা ভবিষ্যৎ বংশধর দিগের নিকট দায়ী ও নিন্দাভাগী হইব। প্রতিযোগিতার ক্ষেত্রে আমাদিগের সমাবস্থার অন্যান্য সহিত সমান তালে পা ফেলিয়া চলিতে হইবে। নির্বুদ্ধিতার জগদ্দল পাথর বুকে চাপাইয়া বসিয়া থাকলে চলিবে না। সরকার প্রদত্ত এই বিশেষ সুযোগ গ্রহণ আমাদের পক্ষে নিতান্ত অপরিহার্য। Such conviction is what appeals to me. The conviction, the kind of strength of argument that Rajendranath Sarkar has provided in every single page of his autobiography, Jiban Katha, it's totally infectious. Rai Charan Sardar, Mahendranath Karan, Hemchandra Noskar, all these people were superiors to him. Think about it. Rajendranath Sarkar was younger, definitely to Rai Charan Sardar. But he, even given his emotional weakness, his fear, and his whatever, he at the end of the day kept his ground. He put his foot down, as it were. He said that, yeah, you guys are saying that, we are Kshatriyas and so on, but that is not going to bring food on our table. If we remain backward, we can never come at par with the Brahmins. Just claiming that we are Kshatriyas will not bring us at par with them. We need to redress our injustice of maldistribution. Once we have resources and wealth, then we can launch our fight better. Then we can come up with a fight for equality in a sounder platform, as it were. We can't remain backward, poorest of the poor, and still claim that we are Kshatriyas. So what he says, look at it. Rajendranath Sarkar is not opposed to politics of recognition. He is saying that politics of recognition must be coupled with politics of redistribution. He's not saying, but unlike the people from 24 Pargana, Rai Charan Sardar and others, they said no politics of redistribution, only politics of recognition can bring back our humanity, can give us human dignity back. But Rajendranath Sarkar is saying no, we need politics of redistribution as well. So just to conclude, I have taken a lot of time, just to conclude the discussion, I'm sure it should be clear to you by now that the Poundras, the great Poundra divide that I have tried to describe today, I'm sure this is something very new, and this is alternative, one could say. I could have published this as an article, but I'm just giving it some fresh ideas to you, and it would be recorded. Thanks for that. But what I'm trying to say is this, that this is a very important point in the history of the Poundra movement and in the Dalit history in general across the country, one could say, because this is a very conscious kind of distinction that one finds among the Poundras. So I would conclude by saying what are the lessons we can draw from this, what I have called great Poundra divide. The first lesson is that the Poundras of the 1930s, they tell us, and perhaps to everybody engaged in anti-caste politics or even identity politics, that we must have recognition and redistribution as the two aspects of social justice we are fighting for. Social justice cannot be fought for, as Nancy Fraser calls it, for groups that are two-dimensionally, so to say, suffering, two-dimensionally subordinated. For groups like that, be it a racial group, be it a gender group, be it a caste group, for these people, both recognition and redistribution are to be fought for equally and must be fought together. They can't be decoupled. They can't be separated from each other. The second lesson that you learn is that Bengal does have a Dalit history. Unlike what people think that Bengals, there is no caste in Bengal. There hasn't been anti-caste struggle in Bengal. Bengal is a casteless land. Even Kacha Ilaya, a few years back, he came to Bengal and gave a lecture, and he said that in Bengal, caste is like a cancer without diagnosis, meaning that Bengalis suffer from casteism, but they are unable to diagnose the problem properly. He perhaps also by implication meant that Bengalis do not have they're not equipped enough to understand the caste problem and so on and so forth. But as you understand history, and nobody talks about this history, the historians you have read in the big institutions of the country, the history textbooks that you have read in your schools, and the grand discourse of history that takes place within the university system, this historical discourses, they do not give you anything of the sort that I discussed today. I'm sure about that. And if you think about it, the second point I'm trying to make by way of conclusion is that we must understand that Dalit history cannot be subsumed within Brahminical history. The intra-community fight that happened between the Poundra representatives of South 24 Parganas, Kolkata and Midnapur, and the representatives from Khulna district, this split shows that it was an intra-community debate. Poundras can think. Poundras could interrogate. Poundras could interrogate each other. Poundras could engage in debates and discussions. Poundras could theorize, can theorize. As Gopal Guru says that historically, in the social sciences discourses and institutions, the Shudra has been considered to be an empirical person, and the Brahmin has been considered to be a theoretical person. Brahmin can theorize, Shudra can only experience. The theoretical Brahmin and the empirical Shudra. But as you realize, it's total nonsense. Shudras also, lower castes also, Dalits also can theorize, they can think, they can debate, they can argue, they can stand for their rights, they know what is human rights violations, what is not. And this opinion, this second point in the conclusion is against someone like Shekhar Bandyopadhyay. If you look Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, who is considered to be the ubiquitous present, as it were, ubiquitous present in caste studies in Bengal. Everywhere Shekhar Bandyopadhyay is cited by the scholars. At one place, Shekhar Bandyopadhyay says that in colonial Bengal, or even post-colonial Bengal, Dalit movements have been subsumed by Brahminical imagination. Dalit movements have been subsumed by Brahminical imagination. This is total nonsense. I'm sure today's discussion has made it clear that Dalit history, Dalit thinking, Dalit consciousness cannot be subsumed by Brahminical imagination. Yes, if you think about the movement of recognition, self-respect that you find, in Mahendranath Karan and others who are trying to claim that they are Poundra Kshatriyas and so on, and claiming Kshatriyahood, you could always say that they were trapped within the Brahminical imagination or the Varna system. They were trapped within the Varna linguist, Varna culture, as it were. But they are anti-Brahminical nonetheless. The entire claim, the entire assertion that we are Kshatriyas is fundamentally an assertion against the Brahmins. To claim that, yeah, you may be Brahmins, but we are Kshatriyas. Therefore, it is anti-Brahminical. Even the very notion of assertion of Kshatriyahood is anti-Brahminical. It may not be anti-Varna, anti-caste, but it is anti-Brahminical to begin with. And the other thing is this: you can't just say that Poundra history is just a homogeneous history reduced to Mahendranath Karan or Raicharan Sardar. It's a heterogeneous community. People who think in different ways. And there is a dialectical thinking where some people think recognition is important, some people think redistribution is important. And thanks to Rajendranath Sarkar, the Poundras of today can actually avail the rights of representation and reservation as enshrined in the Constitution of India, which was drafted by Babasaheb Ambedkar. And back to Babasaheb Ambedkar at the end of the lecture, one could say. Therefore, and the third point I would like to make about the question of Fraser's theory. I have used Fraser's theory of recognition and redistribution as if it can totally fit into the discourse of the Great Poundra Divide. But as you realize, there can be problems. Fraser, first of all, didn't talk about the caste question. And I think Fraser's theory theory of redistribution applies very well here. But recognition cannot be, it's a complicated notion of recognition that the Poundras had, because they wanted to be recognized, unlike, let's say, Dalits asserting themselves as Dalits, LGBTQIA plus community asserted themselves as such, blacks asserting themselves, yeah, we are black, so what? Poundras were not trying to assert themselves, but section of the Poundras, not the entire Poundra community. Poundras, one section, they were not trying to assert themselves as Dalits. They're trying to say that we are Kshatriyas. Therefore, the point I'm trying to make is this, that there is a complicated experience of recognition as far as the Poundras are concerned. And although, as I said, deeply psychologically rooted is the suffering of being untouchable. So when you suffer as an untouchable, or you are maltreated as an untouchable, you are dehumanized, you come up with some defense mechanism. And claiming Kshatriyahood is the defense mechanism. But having said that, the question of recognition in Fraser doesn't completely probably fit into the fight for recognition that we find not only among the Poundras, but among all the Dalits communities across the country in 19th century and early 20th century India. So with these few remarks, that the Poundras engaged in both recognition and redistribution, and that Poundras should be understood as having an intra-community intellectual history, and that Fraser's theory of recognition should be taken with a pinch of salt when it comes to the question of Poundra assertion of recognition. With these few remarks, I end on the discussion. Thank you very much for patiently giving me a hearing.
Thank you, sir. It was such a wonderful, and I love the fact that it was so lucid and you were so energetic throughout the lecture. If anybody have any question, please raise your hand, or if you have difficulty to unmute yourself, you could just write in the chat box and I can convey it to the others.
Before anyone go, may I, sir, just ask a question? So it is really, as Shagota has already said, it's wonderful lecture. So my question is that once we, at present, once we now try to understand the present context, the main problem is that the social category of caste is different and the state categories caste is different in terms of data or in terms of information, you can say. For example, in census of India, we have a state category called scheduled caste. So if somebody is trying to understand in present context how much in terms of social upliftment or how much in terms of social mobility someone has go up, as in the understanding of, let's say, for example, how Suri caste have done or how is their socio-economic condition. So we find this difficulty between this social category and this state category. So for a research student like me, if I want to study, like for example, the Suri community, how to go about it, one question, and in a methodological context, how you just your response to this particular question, this divide between the social category of understanding of caste and the state category of understanding of caste.
Okay, that's an interesting question, Shubhadeep, but I don't think I can immediately answer. It's also a difficult question. Now, I can give a few instant responses, but I'm sure this is not going to be exhaustive. One is, of course, the social category of caste and and as you said, the state category of caste. The ways in which this categorization has happened is something that needs to be researched more, because as you know, people with similar surnames may belong to different castes, not only across different states, but they can also be different castes within the same state. Therefore, this categorization, the question of categorization is very, I think, in my understanding, a matter that needs to be exhaustively studied, and I haven't done that much study, so I can't immediately respond to that. But one thing I can respond to is the question of upliftment that you mentioned at the end of your remark. the advancement of the let's say the Shuri caste in particular, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be analyzed to what extent advancement has happened. Let me give you one example. As I said, Rajbangshis, Namashudras, Bagdi, and Poundra. These are the four high population scheduled caste from Bengal. Now, if you look at the Poundras have, by 2001 they were more than 22 lakhs. I'm sure now it would be 30 lakhs or something. Poundras have one of the largest Dalit population in the state, but they are the most vulnerable Dalit communities, in the sense that, let's say a Dalit community which has 20,000 people, and if you have, let's say, 5 from the 20,000 people coming up, being visible among certain sections in politics, in public affairs, in government, etc., then it's pretty much a good representation. But think about it: if 5 people from 22 lakhs population, they come at the forefront, then it's a sad commentary on the advancement of this particular group that has 22 lakh population. So, and there is a good study, and I would encourage you to study, to read the works of Rup Kumar Borman, who has written at length about this. A few of his work, I think one is very brilliant text called "Yes, the Scheduled Castes Can Write," and it's a response to Spivak's essay, as you understand. And Rup Kumar has at length worked on the social uplift of the Dalits in Bengal in comparison to their actual number in terms of population. So I think the question of social uplift, even for a community like Shuri or Shaha and other communities, it is a matter of research. It is something, as you say, research alternative. It is a research alternative. One has to investigate this question. It's a very good question, but this question needs to be addressed in conjunction with thorough research. And I think a research based on data, a data-based research, archival research, can actually solve this question. Okay, Shubhadeep.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Relating to Shubhadeep's question, I would like to add something. Like 2 or 3 years back, I had prepared a research abstract on the history of liquor, food history of country liquor, and the Suri community, because as we know, the Suri community to be the producer of country liquor. And when I had completed the abstract, I had the research question in mind, but I could not find a proper way to dig out the available sources and the kind of methodology that are concerned. So when you worked on this project on the history of Poundra, so could you please give some glimpses so as to I can help with my research? I mean, I could not find any source as such, probably because there is, obviously because it do not fall under the category of the hegemonic way of history and the dominant historiography. But also I could feel that, also, yeah, as you said about the archive. So could you also say, when the archival of such documents are being done, how do state look into this kind of archives that documents that documents this kind of things from the margins of the society? Could you also talk about how state look into that? And also, when a beginner, a novice researcher embarks upon the research journey, how he should look into this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me show you something that I have in front of me right now. I don't know whether you can see this. This is a book called Poundra Monisha. There are a few volumes of Poundra Monisha. Sorry, it is probably being shown, I don't know.
It's visible.
It's flipped and so on, I don't know. But never mind. So, first of all, you have to see, this is a good question, a good research methodological question. First of all, you have to see whether you have an archive or not. In the sense that whether you have an archive with documents, written documents, published or unpublished, doesn't matter. it is possible that you might not have. Because not all communities have produced enough data, enough writings, enough literature, which you can use as your archival document. In that case, I'm not very sure about the Shuri community, but I am sure about, let's say, insofar as the scheduled caste communities are concerned, I'm sure about Namashudra community. When you talk about Dalit literature, you know, we usually talk about Namashudra literature. Okay, literature produced by, most of them are Namashudra, because they have been, for various historical reasons, they have been the most advanced, culturally advanced. So you have a lot of archival and literary output from the Namashudra community. But for specific communities, you might not have an archive. So in that case, I think you have to build the archive. You have to build the archive. How do you do that? You take oral interviews, go and talk to people, you document those, and maybe you transcribe those and create an archive for your own. Particularly this entire idea of liquor and so on and so forth. I think it's a very, first of all, it's a very interesting research. Let me congratulate you for having considered this to be a research topic. It's a very interesting research area, to think about how the marginalized castes, they have produced liquor and the history of that liquor. It's very interesting research topic. So in my understanding, you might not find much writing about it. If you don't find much writing about it, the only option is to go and take interviews. And take interviews not only of people who are currently engaged in creating liquor, but also I would say the most elderly people. From them you can derive a history. I showed you this because the Poundras of Bengal, they have been really proactive in the last few years to restore their tradition. This is another volume. There are 7 to 8 volumes of Poundra Monisha. I have more or less all. But what I'm saying is that you have to build an archive. And that archive can be built only through interactions, conversations with people. If you do not have an archive, build an archive and then do research on that. That can be a very enriching output, not only the findings, but also the primary works you are generating. And you can upload those on the internet. Maybe you can create a website as part of your research project. And you can, of course, take permission from them. I'm sure people would be interested. Even people from Shuri community who are engaged in this profession, they would be interested. Everybody wants to be recognized. Everybody wants their history to be known, to be documented. So I would suggest you go for interactions and documentation, and like things like that. I'm also I'm also engaged in things like that as of now, because I'm working on this project with Novayana, and that project doesn't just involve reading some books. It also involves intra-community interactions. So I talk to Poundras. I'm trying to get in touch with Poundras who have the history of their, who have a history, who have things to share with me, and I try to bring those in my writing. So my work is also based on oral and written literature. So I suggest you do the same. It can be really productive.
Thank you, sir. But also at the same time, we have seen that the mainstream historiography, they constantly attack the oral history on the basis of its evidence, and also it is also vulnerable to the fact that it leaves ample amount of space for distortion. So if any such if anything as like that occurred, how should and how would we combat that?
First of all, if you have a documented archive, video, let's say videograph, videos, how can you distort those? If you have videos of, let's say, one particular community, they're speaking on their behalf. This is number one. Number two is that you have also to see whether you can supplement those with written literature. Okay, so I'm sure you'd find, I'm sure there are works. It's just that I haven't worked on this, so I don't know, obviously. But I'm sure you'd find even people talking about their community, even upper caste writers writing about them. Like Shotuji writer talks about the Adivashis in Aranya Din Ratri, very stereotypical misrepresentation of the Adivashi community. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is this: people definitely, there is a discourse already in existence, not just oral discourse. You supplement your oral interventions with written literature, and you have to find out written literature. You'd find, definitely you'd find some kind of literature, some kind of writing, historical writings on this. Those can be put to question. Those can be interrogated. You might find that whatever Shekhar Bandyopadhyay has written, most of the things I don't agree with. And thank God I started doing Dalit studies so that I can expose these people now. But what I'm saying is that you can always supplement your oral literature with written literature. And you can develop your argument accordingly. Because talking about marginalized communities is very difficult because they didn't produce to begin with much literary, much archival output. So you can't help it.
And the particular book that you just showed us, in which year was those volumes written?
Like this way, like Jibon Kotha by Rajendranath Sarkar, I think it was published around 1970s or something. But this has been like, this book is out of print. So the Poundra Mahashangha, the new Poundra organization, they started republishing, reprinting. And they created a series called Poundra Monisha, divided into many volumes, and they restored those works. So it's a brilliant work, I should say. They've done a brilliant work.
So there was this literacy consciousness among the community that they need to document themselves, and that would provide also as a basis of their existence and also for what is going to come in the later half in the future. So if we look into the other communities throughout India, among the other scheduled caste communities, do you see any such documentation? I mean, not like now, but like 50 or 60 years ago, when this kind of consciousness was not so much within the sphere.
Yeah, true. I mean, look, if you have read Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, his notion of the subaltern in the prison notebooks, not the selection from prison notebooks, but if you read the prison notebooks in its entirety, he talks about the subaltern as a heterogeneous entity. It's not like homogeneous, heterogeneous, and it divides the subalterns into multiple levels. So he says those subalterns who have written about themselves or written about their community, they are somewhat at an upper level because they have a sense of, they're sensitized, they have a sense of being organized and so on and so forth. So we have to see at what level that particular caste subaltern group belongs. Okay, and you have to, because if they belong to the lowest of the low, chances are they do not have, because education did not reach them. Education is also a matter of right and privilege, isn't it? Not everybody has the had the right to be educated. So the lower the group is at the spectrum on the scale, the more is the chance that they haven't produced much literary work. Therefore, you have to engage in cultural studies. You have to engage in study of traditions, in rites and rituals, in their belief systems, most of which have been circulated through let's say in the context of Sundarbans, the goddess Bono Bibi. Now, not much has been written, but if you go to the Sundarbans, people will talk about the goddess Bono Bibi and the tradition and the myths about Bono Bibi and so on and so forth. So myths and oral traditions, if those have been documented, in many cases those have been documented, those can be used as a reference point. And you have to see like at which level this particular subaltern group belong. But it's a good question, yeah. Thank you.
We have one more question from Toshali Raina, and her question is, this is a request, if you could elaborate on the subsumption of the caste question within Brahminical imagination. Since you mentioned the Kshatriyas trying to assert themselves as Kshatriyas and not untouchables, how is it outside the Brahminical ontological framework? If you could kindly elaborate.
It's a good question, actually. It's a very good question. First of all, yeah, I mean, since you mentioned the Kshatriyas trying to, not Kshatriyas, Poundras trying to assert themselves as Kshatriyas. Yeah, so what I tried to say is that there is, one could say, that's what I said, that first of all, not all Kshatriyas, not all Poundras were interested in asserting Kshatriyahood. They were interested in reclaiming their human personality, in getting wealth, resources distributed back to them. So not all Poundras thought like that. But the other question is this, that it was you could say even the Burner system, one could say that Burner system in itself, if you look at the original Burner system, it was considered to be not really Brahminical. It is the caste system that was Brahminical. But Burner system, at least theoretically, the 4 classes or 3 classes, they were, there was a cross-class mobility. The classes were open. So anybody, even being born to a Kshatriya could become a priest. In fact, I think the guy who, sorry for using the phrase the guy, but never mind, the guy who created this Gayatri Mantra, I think he was not a Brahmin, he was a Kshatriya. I think Bishamitra or something, I don't know. But I don't utter Gayatri Mantra, so I'm utterly disgusted with it. But I think you had, even in ancient times, it is said, even women could be priests and so on and so forth. The point I'm trying to make is this: Burner system was not really that much Brahminical. It was more like a class system which had possibility of cross-class mobility. It is the caste system. When the Burner system degenerated into caste system, it is only then that these classes become closed groups, as Baba Sahib says in his masterpiece, Castes, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development. In that work, Baba Sahib says that caste was a result of Burner being closed system. So Burner was open. When Brahmins closed themselves in, they closed others out. Other non-Brahmin classes, they emulated the Brahmins. So all castes, they closed themselves in individually and closed others out. So it is the caste system that is fundamentally Brahminical, predominantly Brahminical, that glorifies Brahminical supremacy. And what these people are, even Dayanand Saraswati was doing it in a different context. Even the Poundras, what they wanted is to go back to the Burner system and really reject the caste system, which is a peculiar thing, I should say, which is definitely problematic. But the other thing is that the Poundras were totally anti-Brahmin, if not anti-Brahminical. They were totally anti-Brahmin. So it is in response to the Brahmins maltreating them as untouchables. They said, you may be Brahmins, but we are Kshatriyas. And as per the Varna system, Brahmins and Kshatriyas are not that different. We are equal. So it was a different kind of game of equality that was being played, taking recourse to the discourse of the Varna system. Okay. So that in that way, it is difficult to reduce the entire self-respect movement to Brahminical imagination. It was not. The anti-Brahmin element in that self-respect movement by the Poundras will be ignored otherwise. You can't ignore that they're totally opposed to the Brahmins. Poundras, even people like Rai Chondra, they were totally opposed to the Brahmins. It was fundamentally an anti-Brahmin movement. Although the technique of launching that movement was problematic, I totally admit that. I have already mentioned it. And once again, this is not something that all the Poundras believed in. Poundras like Rajendranath Sarkar from Khulna district totally were launching other kinds of movement, as I said, claims for redistribution and so on. But that's a very good question. It means that I made sense, that you listen to my talk very closely. Yeah, thank you.
There is one more question from Kaushik Mondal. Can you please let me know if there is any study about how local gods and local belief system of Poundra got replaced by Brahminical gods, and what is the current status of this? Sir, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I'm actually writing about it recently. I have tried writing. Once the book is published, you should be able to see it. But one of the reasons, as I said, the goddess Bonobibi could be one instance. In the Sundarban, Sundarban has around 101 islands, out of which I think 52 islands are inhabited by human beings. There was a time when in all these 52 islands, Bonobibi was worshipped. Bonobibi is the local god, if you like. God is Bonobibi. And these islands are populated by Poundras. The Sundarban Islands, it's massively populated by the Poundras. There are others, like there are tribals, there are Brahmins, very tiny population of Brahmin. There are Muslims in this region. But the bulk of the population in the Sundarbans is basically, Poundras. Now, this population, there was a time when they did worship local gods and goddesses, particularly, as I said, Bonobibi. But even when I was a kid, I was in my village, I was, studying in a school in the village, and I did participate in Bonobibi worship of the goddess Bonobibi. there would be annual puja, Bono Baby puja. Eventually, I found as I grew up that Bono Baby is not worshipped, at least not in my island, not in the nearby islands, not anymore. Understanding Hindu gods and goddesses have successfully colonized the island of Sundarban. And the local gods and goddesses have gradually been displaced, including this particular case of Bono. This is just one answer to a brilliant question. I think if you study more, you would find how Brahminical gods have displaced the local gods and goddesses, either displaced or appropriated them as part of the Hindu pantheon. It's a huge game that is being played out in the name of religion out there. Just be careful. Okay, just be careful about that. But that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
Is there anyone who would like to any question?
I think we had enough questions for one day.
Yes. Late.
Yeah.
So it's time. Thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful evening, for the wonderful lecture, and I thank all the all the listeners for staying with us for so long, and obviously for such wonderful questions that came up from your side. We all hope to organize more such sessions later in future, and I would urge you all to stay with us, and please subscribe to our channel, and if possible, let me know so that I could those people who are interested make part of this group. And thank you again, sir. Thank you very much.
Let me thank you once again, Shagoto and Shubhadeep and others who are part of Society for Research Alternative. Let me also thank the audience, and I have at least 3 people who are very close to me. My colleague Priyanka and another friend Anushrita, and Probal, who is also a student who quite regularly attends my lectures. So thanks to all of them for joining me today. And thanks to everybody. There were around 30 people at one point. So thanks for joining me. It was an extremely experience for me. So thanks for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.